Good evening, everyone. My name is Fireweed, and along with my partner Mike Nestor, who you've heard in the background here, we're your Denman Island hosts for tonight's panel presentations. We respectfully acknowledge that we are speaking to you from the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation and shared territories of the Kwakwaka'wakw and Coast Salish peoples. As settlers here, we know that this privilege is connected not only to the colonial past, but to its legacy as that continues to unfold. We recognize and accept the responsibility of reconciliation with First Nations, along with right relationship to the land and waters that comprise our life support systems here in the Salish Sea and beyond. Planting and protecting trees for the future is both the name of this event and that of one climate action committee working in alliance with and as part of the Denman Island Climate Action Network, or DICAN for short. There are a variety of events honoring Earth Day here this week, and we are also celebrating the official launch of the new DICAN website. So we invite you to visit and bookmark www.denmanislandclimateaction.ca. As a network, we are committed to rooting our climate actions in social justice and equity. We recognize that climate action happens on individual, community, regional, and global levels, and that these are interwoven and mutually supportive. As our mission statement adds, we are inspired by mycelium, an interconnected structure that communicates and nourishes. There is, of course, a decades-long history of environmental activism here on Denman Island, of which planting and protecting trees for the future is just one recent incarnation, and we invite others to join us. As a DICAN initiative, we've operated primarily as a social media site on Facebook for the past year and a few months, linking to immediate action opportunities from the local to international level, to news items on topic, petitions and fundraising sites, and relevant data concerning everything from standing forest protection to food security through the planting of food forests and wildlife-friendly regenerative agroecology around the world. Most recently, our social media outreach is focused primarily on keeping folks up to date on the frontline actions taking place in defensive old-growth forests on southern Vancouver Island. In March, we took an active role helping organize the Comox Valley-based Forest March BC rally in Courtenay, in solidarity with communities all across the province. And now, in alliance with SOFT CV, and that stands for Save Our Forest Team Comox Valley, planting and protecting trees for the future, is involved with helping coordinate ongoing demonstrations in downtown Courtenay in support of old growth protection at Fairy Creek and other vulnerable ecosystems on Vancouver Island. The next one, by the way, is coming up on Saturday, not Friday this week, but Saturday at noon at the 17th Street Bridge, and we hope you'll join us. Those of you who are local, I know that we have a few folks with us tonight from elsewhere, not just in the Comox Valley. We're not going to be talking tonight about the myriad benefits of planting fruit and nut trees, which is definitely one of our passions. Then they can certainly also help sequester carbon. We'd love to do another panel presentation on the topic of food forests, etc., for some future event. But we are going to stick instead with the importance of protecting standing forests tonight and also touch on how we can support local and regional habitat health, in part through land acquisition, in part through tree planting initiatives already underway here, lobbying the government, etc. With the help of our awesome panelists, we will begin with a big picture overview of the relationship between trees and climate, look at the related issues of biodiversity loss and endangered species, zooming back in to the Gulf Islands, and time permitting, conclude with a short video clip at the end of the evening that will bring us back to the urgent issue of old growth protection here on Vancouver Island, our region. This event, of course, is being recorded for the purpose of sharing widely after the fact, with the hope of inspiring others to join us in taking further action. So hopefully you'll be able to find it later on the DICAN website tonight. I know that Jens and possibly another one of our presenters may have to leave a bit early, so I really want to thank all of our panelists this evening right now for so generously volunteering to share their valuable time and expertise with us tonight. Thank you so much. Jens Wieting is Sierra Club's senior forest and climate campaigner. He works for the protection of BC's endangered rainforests and a stable climate. His focus is on solutions to maintain the ecological integrity and the climate stabilizing role of BC's forests, and on speeding up the transition to zero emissions. And I do believe Jens is coming to us from East Vancouver tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Jens. I'm just going to see now if I can pin you here for your presentation. Okay, how are we doing? Is that working?
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. We truly live in crazy times in the midst of a pandemic, a climate and biodiversity crisis. Thanks also for the introduction. As Fireweed said, I'm joining you from East Vancouver, from the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I will try to connect the dots a little bit to get us started between the role of our forests and climate change in the midst of this climate crisis, and our outstanding global responsibility to step up to the plate, because as many of you know, there are forests here in this part of the world that cannot be found anywhere else on the planet. And I will include a short update on the promise to fully implement the old growth panel recommendations. So I will start by sharing this quote from one of my favorite authors. Many of you probably read her book, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass. In some native languages, the term for plants translates to those who take care of us. And as you know, this is true for the forests. They are irreplaceable, and it's quite astounding that we haven't learned from our mistakes yet. So the vast majority, many species globally, particularly those that have been described that are known, depend on forests, and we have many species along the coast of BC and in this province that cannot live, that don't exist anywhere else. And globally, we have hundreds of millions of people who depend directly on forests for their livelihood. And they regulate the climate. They're helping us to breathe and providing clean air, clean water. And one of the key reasons, I think, why we are taking so long to realize our mistake and change course is that we have trouble understanding how quickly we are changing the landscape on this planet, particularly in this part of the world. So indigenous peoples have lived with these ecosystems for thousands of years without disrupting the ecosystems, without undermining ecological integrity. And we have governments today claiming that our current land use is sustainable, not understanding that we have dramatically changed the landscape in this part of the world in just about 100 years and a few decades of industrial activity. And in the course of colonization and unleashing industrial activity, the number of endangered species is skyrocketing. And we are moving into uncharted territory in terms of climate change. This is a recent version of the hockey stick, pretty much showing how we are quickly moving out of the known temperature range that we have benefited from for thousands of years. And in a nutshell, we cannot save a stable climate without protecting intact forests, and we cannot maintain intact forests without a stable climate. So we really have to act now based on these trends that I've just shared with you. We have a very limited amount of time to turn things around. At this point in time, forests are still helping us to slow down climate change by absorbing huge amounts of carbon. But we also know that this can change. And if we continue on the current path, destroying forests and warming the planet to a degree that forests cannot adapt to, we will lose more and more carbon from forests instead of sequestering more. Forests continue to protect communities from climate impacts like droughts and flooding. And it's very clear that protecting forests, restoring forests must be part of climate action. And it's currently not happening in BC and very limited degree at the federal level. But particularly here in BC, it's just astounding that there's no coherent forest climate action strategy included in Clean BC and the provincial plans to reduce emissions. And as mentioned initially, there are spectacular opportunities for us in this part of the world to contribute to solutions, particularly protecting temperate rainforests, which are globally rare and have characteristics that cannot be found elsewhere. So we have very high carbon storage per hectare, hundreds of tons per hectare in temperate rainforests, and we are losing a huge amount of the carbon stored in old growth forests every time we allow continued clear cutting of these forests. Similarly, very tall trees that cannot be found elsewhere. And as you know, we have already transformed vast areas across BC. This is a mapping project called Seeing Red by a group called Conservation North. Some of you may have seen it, showing in red all the landscapes, all the forests that have been disturbed by industrial activity, and unfortunately only smaller areas left where old growth forests or primary forests still exist. Zooming in a little bit, and a reminder about the visual of the clear cuts, in this case on Vancouver Island. So old growth forests are absolutely crucial as global carbon sinks because they have accumulated carbon over hundreds of years, and we are losing a very big portion of this when clear cutting happens. And every time we manage to protect more old growth forest, there's an immediate benefit because this massive loss of carbon occurs over a short period of time. So implementing the old growth panel plan, for example, would have a very significant impact on reducing emissions quickly. And planting trees is also important, but we have to keep in mind that planting trees we still have to wait for several years and decades before they grow to a size where they can actually absorb a significant amount of carbon. So more information about just how much carbon dioxide we are emitting through clear cutting can be found in this report that we released in 2019. Easy to find on our website, Clear Cut Carbon. And just about 3 months ago, we released a report called Intact Forest, Safe Communities, highlighting how intact forests reduce the risks of drought, flooding, fire, landslides, and so on. Many of these risks have been identified as growing risks in BC in a provincial climate risk assessment in 2019, but without considering the role of forestry and clear cutting. So it's a huge blind spot, and the BC government must do better and include this information in their upcoming climate adaptation and climate preparedness work. Here's one of the graphs included in our report showing how forests help to protect us from these risks. So we are in for change. So we have completely outdated regulatory frameworks and land use plans, looking at the science, looking at indigenous land rights, looking at climate change. And we have very high ecological risk for old growth ecosystems. So essentially, the majority of our old growth ecosystems are now below crucial thresholds in terms of remaining percentage. It's not enough to sustain the web of life and save plants and animal species from extirpation and extinction. And as we continue logging, we have increasingly severe damages. As logging continues in remote places, the impact in already degraded landscapes is becoming more and more severe. And we have a changing economy. Forestry jobs still exist, but they are less, fewer jobs today, and the role of forestry overall has decreased. And that means that we really have to find solutions to ensure that we can have a long-term diverse economy. There are lots of opportunities to support indigenous-led conservation solutions, partnering with the federal government, who has shown leadership on this. And of course, there's growing support for old growth protection. More than 90% of British Columbians are calling for protection solutions for old growth. So this is the cover of the old growth panel report. Many of you heard about in the news and are calling for action. It's a blueprint for solutions with a framework, a 3-year framework, 14 recommendations, all sorted into 6-month steps. So it's clearly an unprecedented set of recommendations that would not only protect endangered old growth forests, but describe steps to completely reform forestry to make sure that we can have old forest in all landscapes again, and looking at alternatives to clear-cut logging. A transition plan and working with indigenous governments, all the elements are here. Premier Horgan promised to implement these recommendations in totality in October during the snap election. And now, after this short moment of hope, we are back into talk and log and backtracking. Some of you may have seen these cartoons in the Times Colonist. Each ring represents the number of times the BC government has said they would preserve it and didn't. So we are on a very concerning trajectory with not enough actions taken. And you can find out more about the broken promises and what must happen to get on track if you visit our website and check out this old growth report card that we released together with Ancient Forest Alliance and Wilderness Committee in March, 6 months after the BC government shared the panel report showing no progress on these crucial steps. So we have to keep the pressure up. We are truly in a crazy time, but we have to address multiple crises at the same time. So visit our website to find a number of resources, options to take action, send messages. Most importantly, you can find resources how to prepare to meet with your MLA. We know that they are being flooded with meeting requests, and we have to continue on this path to get the commitment, provide the funding, the short-term steps, the work plan from the BC government, and please continue to share in your networks. And together we can keep the pressure up. We have an opportunity, because there was never such an important promise for old growth like the one the Premier made in October. So this makes it a lot easier to hold government's feet to the fire, and we have to continue on this path. Thank you.
Jens, thank you so much. That was terrific. We really, really appreciate your leadership. So working at the Wilderness Committee on Unceded Coast Salish Territories provides Charotte Dawe a platform to advocate on behalf of our environment and all the amazing wildlife we share this planet with. He's focused on species at risk in Canada and BC. Charotte is engaged with policy-related issues that impact wildlife across the country. Besides advocating for stronger and more effective laws to hold governments accountable, she leads investigations into the field to highlight industrial projects proposed within species at risk habitat, to bring attention to them before they begin in order to stop them. So welcome, Charotte, and over to you.
Awesome, thank you so much. Okay, great. I guess I'll just share my screen here. And let's present this from the beginning. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for having me here. Jens, nice to hear from you as always. Yeah, awesome. So just to start out, I am here today in so-called Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I'd just like to obviously acknowledge that I am an uninvited guest here and working to figure out how to navigate that and support Indigenous sovereignty every day in this work. I think we're just learning how to do it correctly and how to put these words into action. So yeah, just acknowledging that before we begin. And so I'm going to talk to you today about biodiversity, quite broadly, or I guess kind of specific and then broad, and then we'll go back specific again. So let's just start big picture. What's biodiversity? So it's the diversity of, or the variety of life on Earth. And yeah, if you want to answer in the chat, I'll be asking some questions. Now, this can be measured on multiple levels. Biodiversity isn't just in terms of species, it's also in terms of genetics within species and ecosystems as well. So basically, how much life is on Earth and how genetically diverse they are within those species. Now, BC is home to more biodiversity than any other province or territory in Canada. Now, I'm wondering if you guys can think of a couple of reasons why this might be. So I guess we'll start by explaining, or I guess I'll just go right into it. So one of the reasons for this is we have so many diverse and different ecosystems. This is a desert-like ecosystem, not technically a desert, but desert-like. It's this shrub steppe habitat, very dry habitat in the South Okanagan. And this area is home to some species that only live there in Canada. That's called endemic. So it's endemic to this area, but also endemic to the world. So we have species that only belong here or to the entire world, which is pretty amazing. We've got these amazing old growth forests and species that have evolved with and rely on these old trees and the spaced out, like under canopy area to hunt and live. Species such as the spotted owl and marbled murrelet, whose fate are directly tied to those big old trees and those old ecosystems that can function in a particular way. We have these incredible coastal marine ecosystems and these kelp forests that contain so much life within them, from small little herring, which feed a variety of salmon, which feed orca. Salmon also feed humans and indigenous people. Salmon also carry life into the forest with all these rivers that extend up through BC. They carry salmon with them, feed the bears, and they feed the trees. And it's all really connected. We have these high alpine ecosystems that support species like caribou that migrate here in the winter to protect themselves from predators who normally, under normal forest conditions, can't access this deep snow wonderland. And these habitats provide a safe refuge for caribou in the winter. And then we have things like this. We have cities, we have smog, and hate it or love it, this is an ecosystem. We have biotic components and abiotic components interacting with each other. There are some species that live here, humans mostly. We have some squirrels, we've got pigeons, but believe it or not, we are in this ecosystem and the broader ecosystem. And these ecosystems exist around us, we are within it, and we have relationships with the other species here. Now, some people tend to not think this way. And this idea that we are separate from nature has been extremely harmful. It's enabled us to behave irresponsibly and destructively because it convinces us that we're able to destroy the very ecosystems we rely on without being impacted ourselves. Of course, this isn't true. Okay, do you believe me? Maybe you don't. If you don't believe me, I'm gonna give you some good examples of how we rely on biodiversity. So one way is we have underground decomposers. We have animal decomposers, and then we have the biotic community also that's doing their thing underground. The diversity of species underneath the ground impact our soils. We need all of those different organisms that can enable this nutrient cycling and decompose dead plants and organic matter, break it down into nutrients that can take it up by plants, and the plants grow into these beautiful trees that can give us fruit and vegetables, and it's the foundation of life. So we obviously rely on diverse organisms below ground for food. Pollinator diversity. 1/3 of our food comes from pollinators in North America. So you can imagine, as we start to impact the diversity of pollinators, that's a direct impact to our ability to feed ourselves. We need a diverse forested ecosystem for water filtration and storage. When you think about a forest and you think about all the different species that have their roots extending into the earth, all of those roots are pathways for water to travel down on, when times when water is really, when there's a high rainfall. And what that does then, it allows water to be stored underground, which gives us these aquifers, fresh drinking water in times when we might need it. So let's say we plucked out a bunch of species in that ecosystem and only left ones with short root systems. All of a sudden, water is not traveling down into that soil and into those aquifers, but it's getting rushed off the land, carrying pesticides and garbage and sedimentation with it, harming rivers, lakes, streams, oceans. So we need diverse species to, store drinking water and filter our water. And lastly, we need diverse species to contribute to this delicate balance of gases in our atmosphere. We evolved to live in this balance of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. So it gets really simple when you just start to think that as we change our species composition in this planet, and as those species contribute different proportions of CO2 or oxygen, it changes that really, really delicate balance of what we evolved to live within. So, directly it threatens our ability to live here just simply based on the gases that we're breathing in and out, but indirectly through things like climate change, which can trigger other disastrous events. Now, let's keep going. Okay, so the year 2019 was a pretty big year for biodiversity. There's this big report by the UN, or the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. They really could not title this in any more boring way. But one of the headlines was 1 million animal and plant species are at risk of extinction. That's kind of a major headline that they found. Now I'm just going to go into some of the more detailed parts of this because it is really interesting. So natural ecosystems have declined by 47% on average. Approximately 25% of species are already threatened with extinction. The abundance of naturally present species has declined by 23% on average in terrestrial communities. Global biomass of wild mammals has fallen 82%. Now that one hurts to read and to say. 72% of indicators developed by Indigenous peoples and local communities show ongoing deterioration of elements of nature important to them. So a couple other things I just wanted to bring out of this. Sorry, 1 second. I actually can't see the top. I think it says 66%. 1 second. Oh yeah, 66% of the ocean is experiencing increasing cumulative impacts. Over 85% of wetland areas have been lost, and 75% of the land surface has been significantly altered by human activities. Sorry, 1 second. There we go. Okay, now I'm wondering if you guys can order these for me. So these are the 5 biggest direct drivers of biodiversity loss and changes within nature. Can you guys order them the top to the least for me? So what's the biggest impact to the least biggest impact? I'll give you maybe like, I don't know, 30 seconds or something to see. You could just put it in the chat if you're interested in that. Or I'll let you just think about it in your head and try to think about what the order would be. Okay. I'm going to move on to the answer. So it's changes in land and sea use, direct exploitation of organisms, climate change, pollution, and invasion of alien species. Now, when I look at this list, as daunting and as sad as it is, I get hopeful about the first two, because these are two things that we directly control, right? We're directly responsible for the change in land and sea use. That's something we can change tomorrow if we really wanted to. And especially also the second, the direct exploitation of organisms, also something that we could change tomorrow if we wanted to. Now, climate change and alien species are a little bit more, they're not as in our control as we would like at this point. So it might be a little bit harder to mitigate those things in the future. As for the first two, I see a great potential for figuring out a new way to live in a way that we can, you know, share this planet in a healthy way. Okay, so this was also a study done in 2019 that found that biodiversity was the highest on Indigenous managed land. Now, that is really, really interesting. And I want to just pull out. So they measured amphibian, bird, mammal, and reptile abundance in Australia, Brazil, and Canada. And it is the highest on lands managed or co-managed by Indigenous peoples. Now, this is higher even than protected areas like parks and wildlife reserves, which is, that's a big finding. And so what we need to do from information like this is obviously this, I mean, we could have guessed it, but Indigenous people are the only peoples who have been able to manage and live on the land in a reciprocal way. And so we obviously need to seek their guidance. So some of the solutions that they found in this report was diverse ways of knowing and doing. And this is a relatively new report. So I'm going to just read the notes from here. So this is creating cultural narratives that locate humanity within a living, intelligent, and a sacred world. Inclusion of Indigenous and local knowledge alongside science as complementary. And then being able to communicate that to the general public is going to be very important. Academics tend to sometimes get very wordsmithy and high level in so much a way that the average public can't even read a scientific paper. Securing customary land tenure of Indigenous peoples and local communities, aka land back, so direct transfer of land back into Indigenous people's hands. Inclusive decision making and self-determination developed. This is Indigenous sovereignty, supporting and putting decision making back into the hands of Indigenous people about what happens where on their lands, and incentives that reward effective culture-based solutions. So this is funding solutions that positively impact people and animals. Sustainable use and diverse local economies. This is shifting away our subsidies to single big industries, and creating diverse, smaller local economies and funding those instead. And revitalizing Indigenous and local food systems. That sounds exactly like what it is funding into local food systems and the sharing and transfer of knowledge within Indigenous communities. So those are some of the big takeaways from that report. And here's a nice little sort of image that ties it all together, the foundations, how we can support collective actions, and some of the amazing results we can get if we implement these solutions. Okay, so let's zoom back to BC species at risk. What's going on here? So we have 1,680 species or subspecies headed for extinction in BC. Now, this is more than any other province or territory in Canada, and you might be saying, well, Charlotte, obviously this is because we have more species, so there's going to be more at risk. And to you, I would say you're correct, but also with a high number of species comes great responsibility. So let's talk about another reason why we have so many species at risk. And it is because we do have huge, powerful industries here in BC. And I will say that logging takes the extinction cake. So we do have oil and gas operating in northern BC. We also have huge hydro mega projects that are extremely problematic for species, but overall, the logging industry has totally obliterated many wildlife populations and put many species on the fast track to extinction. So actually, let's go back. So when I say this, depending on the audience that I present to, a question I almost get immediately after this is, yeah, you know, you can hate logging, but we need the jobs here in BC, and it's either logging or jobs. And so I really wanted to dive into this, and I wanted to figure out what the truth really was. If I was advocating for species protection, am I really asking for everyone to lose their jobs? I sure hope not. So I looked into it. The real cause of forestry job loss. So from 2000 to 2015, there were 45,000 jobs lost in the forestry sector in BC. 64% of the jobs lost were due to companies themselves replacing people with automation and technology. So this is from the Truck Loggers Association data themselves. So you can see this huge pie chart here. 64% was because of the companies were replacing their workers with technology. It's very simple. 22% was low paper demand, 10%, that's where things like species protection would come in, and then 4% is raw log imports. I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper into this technology and automation and understanding what's happening there. And you realize pretty quickly, companies are always going to choose whatever option gives them the most profits. That's how it works in a late capitalist society, is where companies are, that's the goal, is to increase profits year after year. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to replace people with machines, because a machine costs a lot less to pay than a human. And so from that, we can look at this other data that I pulled, which shows that in BC, the logging sector, specifically forest-related jobs, cutting down trees, employs 0.52% of the workforce out of 2.9 million people. So you can compare that with sectors like healthcare, which is 10%, or information, culture, and recreation, which is 3.57%. So this just really paints the story that I don't buy the government's argument anymore that that we can't rework our forestry sector, or if we do protect habitat, we're going to lose all these jobs. The data just isn't there supporting that. So we must reimagine communities, employment, industries, consumption, and decision making that in a way that works within ecosystems and planetary limits. Okay, so are you feeling overwhelmed or powerless? That was not my goal, but we recently made a tool that can help us get some power back in our hands. Now, this is a really big file, so let me just see if I can, okay. Let me just switch screens here. Okay, I'm just going to try to share with you our species at risk story map. Can you guys see this? Okay, I'm going to hope that you can.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so here's the story map. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to figure out exactly where, when, and who is causing extinction in the forests of British Columbia. And so what we did is we made this map. Now you're gonna have to bear with me. It's a very big file, so it might load pretty slowly. So what this map does is it shows all of BC. Now you can see polygons are starting to pop up here. And what it's showing is all newly proposed industrial activities and species at risk habitat. So in habitat that was mapped as critical habitat by the federal government for species at risk. So essentially, these projects are going in and destroying habitat that's essential for species survival. And I am linking these industries to causing extinction. And so we wanted to show you exactly where this is happening. So where are you guys? Denman Island, here we go. Let's go here. Let's zoom in here to all these polygons. So like I said, this isn't a representation of overall footprint. This is new stuff, new proposed projects. These things haven't been created yet, most of them, some of them maybe. So let's see, let's click on this little red polygon and it's gonna tell us, let's try this one. Sorry, it's just because I have it in such a small. little map. Okay, here we go. So this is going to tell us what's being planned here. So it's a BCTS cut block overlapping species habitat of the marbled murrelet. The federal department in charge of it, the area. Now, this is important because these are all projects, like I said, haven't happened yet. And if you go to this legend, it's going to tell you we have approved logging activities, pending, planned activities. We have oil and gas in here, and we have the Trans Mountain tanker route. Now, let's say we found this cut block here, this red one, and we wanted to stop it. I'm going to scroll down and show you this polygon key. So this is sort of showing you out of all of the industries and the polygons you see, it's going to tell you if the polygon is red, it means it's an approved cut block. So it's a cut block. And then the chance of stopping that one might be low because it might be at such a late stage. Whereas if we compare that to a mustard yellow cut block, that shows us that it's a BCTS planned cut block. It's cut blocks and logging roads are both going to be labeled as that. And this is a future plan, so it's not even been submitted for approval yet. The chance of stopping is high. So this is a great tool. You can use it to figure out what projects are in your area and what projects you could stop. And have. So I'm almost done. Thanks for sticking with me for that. I know it's kind of high level.
Okay, Charlotte, I think is back in the room. Do we have you back, Charlotte?
Yes, I am totally done. That was my presentation. I had a feeling that would happen. It's a really big file. Yeah, that is everything. Thank you guys so much for listening. And I just want to state that a tool like that is how we help stop the Argonaut Creek cut block. So I encourage people to check it out and use it to go stop some projects in your area.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so, so much. Okay, so allow me to introduce you, Shauna. Let's see. Okay, Shauna Doll is active with the Raincoast Conservation Foundation, based in Victoria. She is the project coordinator for the Gulf Islands Forest Project, which is focused on addressing biodiversity loss, climate change, and other anthropogenic impacts on coastal Douglas fir habitats. Using Raincoast's signature approach of informed advocacy, the Gulf Islands Forest Project combines community engagement with science and policy review to achieve tangible conservation outcomes. Thank you so much, Shauna, and I will turn the screen over to you.
So my name is Shauna Doll. I work with Raincoast Conservation Foundation as the Gulf Islands Forest Project Coordinator. And with the context that we already have here with Jens talking a little bit more about the high-level climate change impacts and Charlotte talking about biodiversity, I'm going to ground us in the Gulf Islands and the context of work that's happening in the Gulf Islands. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the Gulf Islands Forest Project. Our work is very diverse. We use all kinds of tools to try to engage with the Gulf Islands community to strengthen forest protections for the globally unique and increasingly threatened assemblage of ecosystems characteristic of the coastal Douglas fir region of BC, particularly on the Gulf Islands. Currently, most of our work is grounded in on North and South Pender Islands. But we are expanding currently to focus on the entire region of the Islands Trust area. So we're not just focusing on this one place. As I'm sure many on this call already know, where the CDF is, but here's a nice context map showing us exactly where. I actually have two here. This is a little disorienting having my slideshow running on one screen and the other. I think that hopefully you can see. Sorry about that. Well, this greater context map here, you'll see in the very corner of Vancouver Island, we have the yellow section, and that yellow section is the entire provincial extent and, in fact, the national extent of the CDF forest. So this is a pretty significant place. Currently, it's one of the most converted zones in BC with the most species at risk. And the greatest threat to this ecosystem is in fact change in land use, and I think that that really resonated with me in Charlotte's presentation when she said change in land use is where we see a really great opportunity for change because we have control over that, and that's something that we're really focused on in Raincoast's projects, is looking at how we can change the way that we're using land in this ecosystem that is so limited in the province and in the country. So what we do at Raincoast is most of our work ends up falling under 4 umbrellas in relation to the Gulf Islands Forest Project. Those 4 umbrellas are education and outreach, research and collaboration, policy change, and land protection. I'm just going to quickly go over some of the activities that we do under each umbrella, just to let folks know what kinds of opportunities are available to get involved in forest protection in this region. So the first is education and outreach. One of the biggest focuses we have here under this umbrella is the Pender Islands Big Tree Registry. That's been a community science project that's been in the works since September. We currently have 60 trees in that Big Tree Registry, and we've been working with folks on Cortez and the Discovery Islands to expand that network of big trees. We've also been working with UBC and the provincial registry. And something we're really interested in gathering this data is the motivations that people have to actually participate in this registry and go out and find those big trees, because we feel like those motivations are what's really going to drive how policy is changed to protect those big trees. Some of our other education work is webinars and local community outreach. We go to a lot of grassroots groups meetings and write letters of support where we can and try to support local initiatives for protecting forests across the islands. We also do research and collaboration as part of the Big Tree Registry. We've been working with folks also on Salt Spring who are doing data collection on big trees there and using LiDAR data to detect those big trees and to kind of unpack how accurate that LiDAR data is in I don't want to say guessing, but estimating how tall these trees are. We also work with a postdoc researcher in Washington who is creating a Western red cedar dieback map to try to attach some data and scientific understanding to the anecdotal reports of Western red cedar dieback all up and down the Pacific Northwest coast. So a lot of our research and collaboration is rooted in our education initiatives. One of the greatest focuses of our work is policy change. In the summer of last year, we had a report produced for us by the Environmental Law Center at the University of Victoria, and they were able to synthesize all of the tools that are available to the Islands Trust to protect the I'm going to admit to Louise, who just came into the waiting room as my host duties. So where was I? Anyway, we're working on this policy change, trying to influence the Islands Trust to better protect the ecosystems based on the Environmental Law Center's report. So what you see here is an ad that we just ran in the Times Colonist yesterday, in fact, calling out some of the clear cutting that's been happening on North Pender Island and on a lot of other islands. Salt Spring did a similar ad last month calling out the 40-acre clear cut that just occurred there. So a lot of our work is about drawing attention to some of these land use decision making processes that have been happening. We attend delegations, we write letters to ministers. There's a lot of forms that this work takes to try to influence some policy change to get some stronger forest protection across the Gulf Islands. And the last piece of the work that we do is land protection. We realize that education and outreach, research and collaboration, policy change, all of these things take time to really translate to on the ground action. And the Islands Trust itself has told us that they're a slow organization. And one of the benefits we have at Raincoast, we have a team of 10 full-time staff. We're supported by a huge network of other collaborators, but we're able to make really fast decisions and make things work. So we partnered with the Pender Islands Conservancy late last year to start talking about maybe protecting some land while we wait for these policy changes to go into effect. And we launched a fundraising campaign to purchase a 13-acre property on North Pender Island in November, and we had 6 months to raise the money we needed to purchase it, and we did so in 3 months, which really demonstrates the kind of commitment that the local community has to seeing these lands protected, despite the policy not really representing that desire. And I just wanted to go over how some ways that you can get involved in this work, how you can help. One of the greatest things, and I saw this in Yen's presentation, I saw it in Charlotte's presentation, that we need to hold elected officials accountable to the decision-making that they're doing. This takes the form of doing letter writing campaigns to your local trustees, writing to ministers, writing to MPs, MLAs, and taking the time to let them know exactly what you want to see in your policies. You can tweet about it. You can write the letters to the editor. You can write op-eds. You need to get your voice heard and out there and let people know that you want to see these things protected. Your voice does matter and it makes a difference. Something else I invite everyone to do is to participate in the local community science projects and other environmental initiatives happening locally. Most Gulf Islands have a conservancy, and if you attend a beach cleanup or you attend a tree planting event or a restoration event or pull some Scotch broom out of your front yard, all of these things do make a difference. And I guarantee that all of your conservancies would love to have another set of hands on board to help with some of the work that they're doing. And last, contribute what you can to local land acquisition campaigns and conservation programs. Every little bit helps. And if you don't have the time to commit, donating what you can to these kinds of programs is really helpful. Today, my partner is a student and he was only able to donate $5 to the Nova Scotia SPCA, who just got 77 dogs put into their care. And that $5 is going to buy a meal for one of those dogs. It does make a difference. I think that when you can contribute, it's really great to do so. So that was a really quick overview. I think I skimmed over a few things. I wasn't sure if questions were going to be allowed, so I also included my email here, shauna@raincoast.org. Please feel free to get in touch if you ever want to learn more about how to get involved with some of the work that we're doing. And yeah, I think that's all I have. So thank you.
Beautiful. Shauna, that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Rebecca Benjamin-Carey is a conservation enthusiast who lives on Hornby Island. Operating as a self-described Swiss Army knife for conservation, Rebecca has worked as a diver, videographer, photographer, drone pilot, tree planter, campaign leader, first mate, bosun, and even a cook with several conservation organizations around the world, one of which I happen to know is the Sea Shepherd Society. After doing everything from great white shark research in South Africa, sea turtle and coral reef conservation in the Caribbean, and patrolling for illegal shark fishing on the high seas, Rebecca's focus is now on the herring conservation and climate action through Trees for Tomorrow project with Conservancy Hornby Island. Take it away, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just got a little notification that my internet connection is unstable, so I apologize if I'm coming through blurry or if my audio gets all messed up. I'm sure if everyone understands if you're on any of the islands. But anyways, yeah, my name is Rebecca and I work with Conservancy Hornby Island with the Trees for Tomorrow project. I feel very honored to be part of this conversation here. I feel like a small fish in this conversation with climate change and tree planting. So I don't have a presentation prepared, but I have more of a short little message of action or something that might come as relief to everyone who's freaking out about the climate crisis. I think we all are. And something that Fireweed just said kind of prompted me to remember something about my past and what brought me here to work with a smaller organization. I used to work for Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, and it's really tough and really emotionally straining when you're trying to defeat massive issues you feel like you're the only one there in an entire huge ocean of illegal fishing and shark fishing, and are you really making a difference? And it's hard to scale your impact on conservation in that sense. So I actually came to Hornby Island to focus on something small and to direct all of my energy into actually being able to see what kind of difference we can make. And I think that we're making progress. So that's kind of where Trees for Tomorrow comes in. Trees for Tomorrow is a climate action island started last April 2020 with a goal simply of planting 10,000 trees across the Gulf Islands on private lands. We wanted to get private property owners and residents on the Gulf Islands, this entire Salish Sea coastal region, involved with climate action, actually being able to physically do something. And we know that planting trees are fantastic for carbon sequestration, and just what a natural solution. So we're excited that we could get so many people involved, and we did complete our goal with the help of a lot of local organizations and private property owners. We planted over 10,000 trees. I think the total number was just over 11,000. So each tree will sequester approximately 22 kilograms of carbon dioxide annually once it reaches maturity. And that's kind of the key there, is once it reaches maturity. I think Jens mentioned that as well. It takes a really long time for reforestation to reach a point where it can actually start making a difference. And it's about 10 years. And at the rate that we're logging and at the rate of the carbon emissions that we're putting out, it gets quite scary when you start doing all the calculations of what it would actually take to balance things out. But you have to start somewhere. So we hope that more people can get involved with Trees for Tomorrow. We're going to continue doing it. It started with just Hornby Island. We planted over 7,000 trees on Hornby Island last year, as well as 4,000 trees on Galliano Island in their community forest, thanks to being invited by the Galliano Club. So their community forest was hit by a really devastating forest fire back in 2006, and we were invited to go help them with restoration efforts by planting 4,000 trees there. So that was really exciting. And then this year we're hoping, COVID has really complicated the project, because last year it was pretty much just me and my partner. We're the only two tree planters, primarily, who planted all 10,000 trees. We had a little bit of help on Galliano, but with COVID restrictions and travel restrictions, it's hard to get out there. So we're looking for local volunteers who are tree planters to help us out on other islands. We're really hoping to plant trees on Pender Island as well. We know that we have awesome people on Gabriola Island, who I think have just planted 1,000 trees, kind of our first 1,000 trees for Trees for Tomorrow 2021. So that's very exciting. And this weekend on Hornby, we're doing a tree drive. So if anyone here is attending this webinar from Hornby Island, I'll be driving around delivering trees and planting them for you. So basically the big message here is we all have to start somewhere. And by planting a tree, I think that once people can actually see in their own backyards the amount of time and effort and what goes into just a tiny seedling to a massive Douglas fir tree, you can kind of see the connection between, or what is an old growth forest, what goes into that, and what are we cutting down. So that's all. That's really all I have to say. Is definitely check out Trees for Tomorrow on the Conservancy Hornby Island website. And if you'd like to support it, we do plant a tree for every $2 donated. So we'll get there. We'll get there eventually, and we hope to plant 10,000 trees again in 2021.
Absolutely incredible work. Wow. And I know Rebecca has said that there have been a few landowners here on Denman Island who have have taken up the opportunity to have trees planted over here, right, Rebecca?
Yep, that's true. Yeah, we will be planting trees on Denman Island as well.
Fantastic. One more speaker lined up for this evening, and I am going to bring her to the fore right now. And that is Patti Willis. So let me just introduce our last speaker of the evening, everyone. Patti is a longtime peace activist and tree lover who's lived on Denman Island for 51 years. She spent many years on the Denman Island Forestry Committee and is a longtime director for Denman Conservancy Association. In fact, I want to mention that Patti facilitated the transformation of DCA from a volunteer organization focused on land acquisition to a staffed organization managing extensive protected lands and nature reserves held by the island's trust fund. Having honed her skills in developing conservation covenants over the years, Patti has become known as a leader in the field, not only on Denman Island, but throughout British Columbia. Her work in this arena is ongoing, and I'm so grateful that Patti is going to provide us information here tonight about DCA's most recent land acquisition project and how we can support that. Thank you, Patti.
Thank you, Fireweed and Mike, for hosting this evening. I just want to acknowledge that the Denman Conservancy Association, which I'm going to refer to as DCA, our work takes place for conservation takes place within the unceded traditional territories of First Nations, whose relationship to these lands spans many generations and continues today. What interests me about this webinar is that it illustrates there's just such a number of ways to work to protect the planet through climate action. And this variety of approaches and tools actually replicates the very biodiversity that sustains us. Now, DCA has spent the last 30 years rescuing lands that have had significant natural features and/or are in jeopardy of human intervention and interference, something that our species is very good at. When I came here in 1970, Denman boasted a single protected area, the Falongley Provincial Park, or about 0.005% of Denman's landmass. Even before DCA's founding in 1991, Islanders began a vigilant defense against ill-conceived projects such as the wholesale logging of the Comas Bluffs, plans to log all the way to the western shores of Chickadee Lake, government plans to cash in on crown lands, and illusions of subdivision grandeur. Over 30 years, DCA has developed the necessary infrastructure and garnered the support and reputation to give shape to community conservation efforts. The Conservancy has now contributed to the protection of 25% of Denman's landmass. So we're going from 0.005 30 years ago to 25% today. DCA contributed directly by means of land purchase, holding covenants, management agreements, and by legal settlement. And DCA contributed indirectly to the increased percentage by amassing the science about these lands, laying the underpinning for a rock hard, solid case and justification for their protection. And of course, year after year, DCA has educated our community about the natural treasure that we inhabited. Just to note that in the next few weeks, we will add to this treasure as a generous islander is donating 15 fully treed acres. And these are second growth trees. There may be a few ancient trees on them as well. 15 fully treed acres to DCA, and that land will be committed to conservation. Now, our current effort is to acquire what we are calling the Pickles Waterfall Wetland, 80 acres owned by a logging company. So it's called the Pickles Waterfall Wetland Conservation Project. Waterfall is a little bit of poetic license. It's more of a seasonal cascade. Anyway, what we are doing, here we go. I'm trying to get the second one here. Here we go. It's in the coastal Douglas fir forest zone ecosystem. And as it's been referred to earlier tonight, only 1% of this ecosystem remains in BC. 80% of those are in private land, so that really limits our ability to protect them and conservation options. Our greatest challenge, climate change. The trees, the soil, the vegetation of these lands provide a natural carbon sink, removing carbon from the atmosphere and locking it in these trees. If we allow these trees on these properties to grow, the old trees, by virtue of their age and size, can hold far more carbon. And this has also been referred to earlier, I think both by Rebecca and perhaps by Jens. Now, what's interesting, it's part of the headwaters of the salmon-bearing Beadnell Creek system. You can see it's this little star right here. I don't know, maybe I can't point to it. I have no idea what I'm doing. And it is provides a landscape area of joined protected lands. So you can see that there's a number of different protected lands that surround it or are attached to it. And this is very important when one wants to protect conservation lands, is to have it part of a kind of adjoining connection of protected lands. There are parks, there's lands that are owned by the Conservancy or managed by the Conservancy. So there's quite a lot in that area. This is sort of the northern central part of Denman. There's incredibly diverse flora and wildlife habitat. And this is our last chance to protect this special place. As I said, it is owned by a logging company. And this forestry zoned property has sat vacant since they were last logged approximately 40 years ago. There is new development interest, and at least one private purchase offer has been made in 2021. And we want everyone's help to protect these lands before it's too late. So here's where we stand. It's owned by Raven Forestry Products Limited. Our purchase offer has been accepted by the company, and it's subject to securing financing based on donations and 2 grant proposals, and they're pending approval. One is from the National Heritage Conservation Program, and the other is from the Habitat Conservation Trust Fund. We will be hearing about our success with those applications sometimes in May. In the meantime, we have a shortfall of somewhere around $100,000. In the last 3 weeks alone, by just personal outreach by 2 of us in the group who are very shameless and have asked people for financial pledges, we've raised $80,000. So we've raised about 80% of what we need of that shortfall. So just to finish, I want to say you can make a pledge. We're not taking cash or funds right now until we know that we've got these grants, because these properties together are about $1 million. So, we're very hopeful, we're optimistic that we're going to get these grants. Our applications were stellar. And we expect to get those grants and be able to complete this purchase. I'd like to just finish my presentation with a poem. What I said when Fireweed asked me to describe myself is that I love trees and I love working for peace. And I find that trees and peace provide a perfect marriage. So here's a little poem section I wanted to read, or some words. Trees are the great messengers of peace. One of the worst crimes in modern humankind is indiscriminate cutting down of the trees and forests in pursuit of establishing so-called civilization. No wonder that modern civilized society has everything but peace. That's by Banani Ray. And that's my presentation, Fireweed. Thank you.
Patti, thank you. It really looks wonderful, and I'm hoping that this recording goes well so it can be shared far and wide. And a big thank you, of course, to all of our presenters. Don't forget to copy those links that I put in the chat and support all of their efforts.